Two ecologists from the University of Pennsylvania once convinced an orange juice company to dump 12,000 tons of waste on 3 hectares of dead pasture inside a Costa Rican national park. 1,000 truckloads of orange peels left to rot in the tropical heat. That was 1997. By 1998, a lawsuit killed the project. By 2013, when a researcher from Princeton finally went looking for that forgotten site, the barren pasture had become a tropical forest. The plant growth had jumped 176%. I'm Ambrose Wild, and today we're tracing exactly how a pile of rotting oranges accidentally grew a forest. Northwestern Costa Rica, early 1990s. The Area de Conservacion Guanacaste is a national park known for its biodiversity, with tropical dry forests stretching across volcanic slopes and coastal lowlands. But large sections of the park didn't look like that at all. Years earlier, ranchers had converted big portions of the land into cattle pasture. They overgrazed it until the soil compacted into hard, dry earth. The native trees disappeared. Plants couldn't take root in the ground anymore. What remained was kilometers of sun-scorched dirt that looked more like a dusty parking lot than a protected ecosystem. Restoring land in that condition is expensive. You need nursery-grown seedlings, irrigation systems, labor crews, and years of ongoing maintenance. For a national park running on limited government funding, large-scale reforestation was basically off the table. That's where Janszen and Winnie Hallwalks come in. The married ecologists had spent years advising Costa Rica's conservation programs, and they knew the park needed a cheaper path to recovery, something unconventional. They found it about 30 kilometers away from the park boundary. Oro SA was a juice company that had recently set up operations in the region, processing thousands of oranges every single day. And like every juice operation, Oro had a waste problem. For every crate of oranges squeezed into juice, there was a pile of leftover peels and pulp with nowhere good to go. Disposal fees were eating into their margins. Janszen and Hallwalks saw an opportunity that could solve both problems at once. What if Oro dumped its orange waste directly onto the park's worst land? The company gets free waste disposal. The park gets thousands of tons of organic material spread across soil that desperately needs nutrients. The decomposing peels would smother the invasive grasses, feed the microbes already living in the dirt, and slowly return nitrogen and carbon to ground that hadn't seen either in years. In 1996, they brokered the deal. Oro would bring its waste to a 3-hectare stretch of degraded pasture inside the park. By early 1997, the trucks were rolling in. Over the following year, about 12,000 metric tons of orange peels and pulp were piled onto that patch of dead ground. To put that number in perspective, that's roughly the weight of 2,000 adult elephants, spread across an area not much bigger than a few football fields. The peels sat in thick, uneven mounds, bright orange against the dry, brown earth. In the Costa Rican heat, the waste started fermenting almost immediately. The citrus smell carried for kilometers on the wind. Flies arrived in swarms. Fungi and insects began breaking the organic material down within days. The scientists believed the chaos was temporary. The decomposition would happen on its own, the organic matter would feed the soil, and the land would begin recovering naturally. They were right about all of that. They just didn't expect to wait 16 years to find out. Because almost as soon as the peels arrived, the complaints started rolling in too. Farmers and townspeople near the park said the smell was unbearable and the insect swarms had gotten out of control. Some of them accused the project of being industrial pollution disguised as conservation. And honestly, it was hard to blame them. The site didn't look like a science experiment. It looked like somebody was using a national park as a landfill. But the biggest problem came from a competitor. Tiko Fruit, a rival juice company, filed a formal lawsuit against Del Oro. They argued that dumping commercial waste inside a national park violated Costa Rica's environmental protection laws. On paper, they had a reasonable case. But the timing told a different story. Del Oro had scored free waste disposal and positive press from the partnership. Tiko Fruit had gotten neither. The business angle was hard to ignore. The case reached a Costa Rican court in 1998, and the ruling came down fast. The judges sided with the opposition and ordered the dumping to stop immediately. The trucks would stop coming, and whatever orange peels were already on the ground would stay right where they were, decomposing in the tropical rain and heat with nobody watching over it. The site wasn't fenced off or marked. Within a couple of years, most people had completely forgotten it existed. For more than 15 years, the orange peel site sat untouched in the Costa Rican heat. Not a single researcher came back to check on the site. Nobody collected soil samples or measured what was growing on the treated ground. The project had been written off as an embarrassing footnote, a well-intentioned idea that fell apart in court. The ecologists moved on to other conservation work. The public had long since moved on too, and the land just sat there, quietly, in the rain. Most people never heard about what was happening underneath all that rotting fruit. Then, in 2013, a Princeton University graduate student named Timothy Truer was researching tropical forest restoration when he came across an old academic paper. It was written by Janszen and Hallwalks, and it mentioned the orange peel experiment in passing. Just one line, noting that nobody had returned to check the site since the court shut it down. That small detail caught Truer's attention. 16 years was a long time in a tropical climate. What if something had actually happened to that land while nobody was looking? He contacted the ecologists who were still active in Costa Rica, and together they set out to track down the old dumping ground. Finding the site turned out to be harder than any of them expected. The original trail markers were long gone. The terrain around the park had shifted so much that the old coordinates barely matched what they could see on the ground. They spent hours just searching. When they finally located it, they could barely process what they were looking at. The site wasn't barren or overgrown with scrub grass. It was a full-grown tropical forest. Tall trees with thick canopies stood where sun-baked dirt used to be. Thick vines coiled around the trunks. The forest floor was covered in green, living soil. Birds called from the canopy overhead. Insects hummed everywhere. 3 hectares of land that couldn't grow weeds 16 years ago had quietly become one of the densest patches of vegetation in the entire park. If you're finding this interesting, consider subscribing. I cover stories like this one every week. Truer knew what he was seeing, but he needed hard numbers to prove it. He and his team set up a formal comparison between the orange peel site and a control plot nearby, a stretch of the same degraded pasture that had never received any waste. The results matched what their eyes already told them. In 2017, Truer's team published their findings in the journal Restoration Ecology. The area that received the orange peels showed a 176% increase in above-ground biomass compared to the untreated control plot. Nearly 3 times more trees, shrubs and ground cover, all growing on land that had been functionally dead before the peels arrived. And nobody had spent a single dollar on irrigation, planting or maintenance since the trucks stopped rolling in 1998. The soil samples told the same story. The treated ground contained far higher concentrations of nitrogen, phosphorus and carbon, exactly the elements that tropical plants need to build roots and grow canopy. The decomposed orange matter had created a rich, fertile layer that the surrounding pasture simply didn't have. And the process behind the recovery was surprisingly straightforward once you understood the sequence. The thick blanket of orange peels had smothered the fast-growing invasive grasses that normally take over damaged tropical land. With that competition gone, native seeds already buried in the soil finally had room to germinate. Birds and small mammals wandering in from the surrounding forest dropped more seeds as they moved through. The improved soil gave all of those seedlings a far better chance at survival than they would have had on the old, hard-packed pasture. Over 16 years, those small advantages quietly compounded into a fully functioning tropical ecosystem. Now, before anyone starts backing a truck full of fruit waste into the nearest empty field, there are some real caveats here. This wasn't a controlled experiment. It was a one-time intervention on one specific site in one specific tropical climate with one specific type of agricultural waste. Not all organic material behaves the same way in soil. Some byproducts can push soil pH into ranges that kill the very microbes responsible for decomposition. What happened at this particular Costa Rican site depended on a specific cocktail of tropical rainfall, soil chemistry, and 16 uninterrupted years of natural processes running without human interference. Copying those exact conditions somewhere else is not a given. That said, other researchers have started testing the same basic idea with different materials. In 2021, a team from the University of Hawaii covered another stretch of degraded Costa Rican pasture with discarded coffee pulp, a different agricultural byproduct that normally just rots in piles at processing plants. Within 2 years, tree cover on the treated plot hit 80%, compared to 20% on the untreated land next to it. The invasive African grass was gone, and native saplings had already shot up to 15 feet tall. These experiments are small. They come with open questions and site-specific variables that make broad conclusions risky. But they point to something worth paying attention to. Every year, millions of tons of organic waste from farms and processing plants get burned, buried in landfills, or simply left to rot. At the same time, degraded land sits empty across the globe, too expensive to restore through conventional methods. The connection between those two problems might be more straightforward than anyone assumed. If 1,000 truckloads of orange peels can quietly grow a forest from nothing, what else are we throwing away that could do the same? I'm Ambrose Wild. If you want more stories about the strange ways nature puts itself back together, this channel is where you'll find them.